Let's answer the question, what if I'm being treated unfairly? Sometimes in life, we're just treated unfairly. Maybe it's because we're a Christian, maybe it has nothing to do with being a Christian, but we're being oppressed for some reason. Maybe you're being oppressed at your work. You've got a boss who treats you unfairly, who doesn't pay you what he owes you, who doesn't give you the vacation or the sick time that you deserve, and he's not going to do anything to correct the situation. Maybe you're in a housing situation where you're stuck. You're stuck in your house, your apartment, and you can't get out, and you've got a landlord who's not living up to his end of the deal. He's not doing the things that he'd said he would do, but you're stuck. What do you do? Maybe you're a Christian at college, and you've got a professor who doesn't like Christians. And please understand, this does happen from time to time. And this professor makes your life miserable. He's treating you unfairly. What do? Or maybe you've got an ex-husband who refuses to pay his end of the child support. What do you do? Well, we're going to turn to the book of James chapter 5 to help us see what God wants us to do when we're being treated unfairly. The first thing is remember that God's people have often been oppressed. The book of James was written to a group of Christians who were being oppressed, and so much of the Bible is written to God's people who are being treated unfairly. For centuries, many of God's people have been poor, and poor people tend to be oppressed. So understand, you're not the first Christian who's been treated unfairly. There's been many people who have been in your shoes who have experienced difficulties for following Jesus and trying to honor him with their lives. The Bible tells us that this life can be very difficult, and we might face oppression, and sadly, that's a reality for a lot of God's people. The reality is that a lot of the Bible was written to people who were being oppressed. So if you're being treated unfairly, you're in really good company. That's the first thing to remember. You're not alone. The second thing comes from James 5, verse 1. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. James writes a whole paragraph to rich people who are oppressing poor people. And the point of that paragraph is this: remember that God will judge those who oppress you. God is the judge of everyone, even if they acknowledge him or not. And God is going to judge people who treat others unfairly. God is going to judge people who unfairly take advantage of those who can't defend themselves. We see examples of God doing that all the time in the Bible, and one day at the end of history, God will judge everyone who took advantage of others, especially those who couldn't defend themselves. The next thing to remember comes from chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. These verses are written directly to people who are being treated unfairly, and look what God says to them. He says, be patient, because God's judgment is coming. God hears you, he sees what you go through, and he will act. Remember that God has not forgotten you. When you feel powerless in a situation, it can seem like God has left you. But God has not forgotten you. He is keeping an account of everything that happens. But we have to be patient and not give up. We have to be like a farmer who waits for the rain to come. And it may seem on some days like that rain's never going to get here, but it does, and it grows his crops. And one day, Jesus will return, and he will judge everyone who's taken advantage of others. And until then, God is with you, and God is watching over you, and God is keeping track of you. And lastly, let's look at verses 10 and 11. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. James ends by reminding us, follow the example of those who have endured. Like I said, many Christians over the centuries have endured hardships, have been treated unfairly, and been oppressed for following God. And yet they persevered. However, you're currently being oppressed, whether it's at work or at school or in some other part of your life, God has not forgotten you. He will sustain you. And in the end, on Judgment Day, it will be worth it. It will be worth it that you followed God and stayed close to Jesus, because God will honor the fact that you honored him. Now go ahead and pause this video and talk about these questions.